Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Medicine Society's first webinar in our series of topics on digital medicine this summer and fall. This afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome John Brownstein, Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's, to take us through his insights on selecting and implementing digital solutions into clinical practice. Our session this afternoon will be moderated by Edmondo from Christiana Care Health System. And just a couple of housekeeping items. Edmondo is going to introduce John for us this afternoon. John will walk us through his presentation, and then Edmondo will moderate some discussion, including input from you all, our attendees. Best way to do this will be to use the chat function in Zoom. Please feel free to ask your questions as the presentation is going on. Type them into the chat box and we will get to them during the discussion at the end. So without further ado, John, Edmondo, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing your expertise with us. And Edmondo, I'll hand over to you.
Excellent, thanks, Jen. So I'm really excited for this topic here, this idea of selecting and implementing digital solutions in clinical settings. It's something that I think about and work on every day at Christiana Care. And so just kind of a couple of thoughts as we kick this off. You think about it from a health. So I'm an internist, I'm a hospitalist by training, and you think about healthcare generally is slow to change, right? So, but I think that's for good reason. And because at the end of the day, lives are really on the line. So you start thinking about why things might be slow to change. And with all the frustrations around that, there's reasons why things are the way they are. You think about hierarchies of evidence. You think about randomized controlled trials versus other. You think about variations in care delivery models and payment structures. There's kind of lots of different influencers there. And you generally have skeptical stakeholders, certainly at the front lines around some of these solutions, some of these innovations that are out there. So there's that's the kind of milieu that we're working in when we think about digital solutions. So that's what we bring digital solutions into the kind of the healthcare arena. That's the clinical world that you're working on, and so within that setting, I really I like to tell my team stay focused on the critical components, right? Thinking about people, thinking about workflow, thinking about the overall culture, and then your solutions. Once you've really navigated and managed that piece, your solutions really can flourish within that kind of that ground that you've laid around the people, workflow, and culture. So I think again, you think about how you drive digital solutions in this kind of environment. It gets to be there's some high level kind of strategic approaches, but you've got to get down to some practical levels as well. So I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Brownstein to kind of give his thoughts on this. As you can see on the screen there, professor at Harvard Medical School, Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's. But interestingly, in something near and dear to my heart, as I think about social determinants of health. Also one of the co-founders of Circulation, which is a digital transportation platform for patients. And so really kind of we're looking for John to help us here understand approaches to implementation of digital solutions in true kind of real world clinical settings. So really excited to hear what he has to say. Just a reminder as you develop questions over the time. As during the presentation, otherwise I will be tracking that. If you use the chat function, you can send them directly to me, or actually you can't because you don't know which Jen Goldstack I am. So send them to everyone. I'll track them, and then I'll pull those up at the end when we have time for some Q&A. So with that, I want to go ahead and hand it over to John and go from there.
Great, thank you everyone. Thank you, Edmondo, for the introduction. It's great to be on this webinar, the first one of its kind, and hopefully get some good conversation going about the opportunities of taking some of the exciting new digital transformation efforts that are happening across a wide variety of stakeholders and seeing how they can really be used to transform the way that we practice medicine. So it's great to be here. I am John Brownstein, the Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's and a professor at Harvard Medical School. And I've been lucky enough to run an accelerator at the hospital for the last 5 years with the idea of really attempting to double down on digital as an organization and attempting to do that from a variety of different lenses. My background is actually in research and have spent a lot of time thinking about how to tap in to underlying data generated in the course of care to provide insights. And my background is in public health, and so always interested in looking at population level trends and attempting to do that through data that's been collected for other purposes, like through the EMR. So I'd like to just give an example. So what I'm showing you here is a cumulative sum of increases in heart attacks, myocardial infarctions across the Partners healthcare system. That was work that I did initially when I came to Harvard Medical School. And what was amazing is that we saw this massive increase in heart attacks happening starting in the early 2000s and subsequently going away. And it's only until we started looking at the data that we saw this signal and recognized that, in fact, there was a major trend that was taking place, likely through the introduction of rofecoxib or Vioxx, and that signal actually subsequently going away once that drug was withdrawn. And obviously the point isn't to talk about adverse events and drug safety, but the point is that huge amounts of data being generated in the course of care that people have just not been looking at that could ultimately influence clinical decision making and ultimately the care of patients. So we have been thinking about digital for a number of years at this organization and taking cues from other industries where the idea of using all that data about your consumer population to helping drive decisions is sort of well known in other industries and really has not taken off in healthcare. At least it's been slower to take off in healthcare, and that's been unfortunate because, as I mentioned earlier, there are incredible signals and opportunities to drive clinical decision making through the underlying data that we're collecting. So, whereas we've seen industries completely change, so from this set of logos to a completely new set of logos, we've recognized that as we think about our patients as consumers, and specifically consumers in the digital world, that there's really this sort of drive to think about how to bring the data about the patient, but also patients that look like them to build better decisions. And we all know that the part of the reason why this is so challenging in healthcare is that we are dealing in siloed systems, siloed environments, a well-guarded electronic medical record, a lack of interoperability and movement of data. And so this has really slowed us down. But ultimately, our goal has been to think about how to bring these data sets together in a way that is very similar to like other industries. Like my background's in geographic information systems. We know how to bring layers about the physical world together through latitude and longitude. There's really no reason why we can't start thinking about health information commons that's driven by the patient identifier that can start to pull together all the layers of information about individuals and populations to help drive analytics, prediction, and better care. So that's really been sort of the goal of our work. This is out of Boston Children's, the top pediatric hospital in the country and world, where we are lucky enough to have amazing care, but also deal with a wide range of patients, often in rare and complex, which also means that we garner a huge amount of data about patients that can ultimately be used to inform and drive decisions. And that really has sort of been the goal of this group. And the reason why we think digital is so critical to that mission is, technology, as it stands, can help accelerate innovation, right? So the idea that you can put know-how and understanding that exists within this organization into software, into tools, can mean that we can move faster, we can extend our reach, we can reach more patients, and ultimately driving that know-how into software can lower costs. And so through all those three different viewpoints, it's been a huge amount of, well, took some convincing, but a recognition that we needed to sort of push ourselves much further in in adopting digital, in taking on opportunities that exist, and driving care. And the way that we have changed over time, we've had an innovation office for a number of years, but that office was really more focused with this concept of fostering innovation, and it was an important sort of first step. But when we started really thinking about how digital was going to transform care, we had to sort of double down, put more resources to work, but also be much smarter in how we were partnering. We have incredible clinical expertise. We have great health IT, leading health IT, incredible vast amounts of historical data. But in order to really move the needle, we needed to look outside the walls of the hospital, to partnerships with a wide variety of different types of organizations to help us build out platforms and ventures, products, which ultimately serve our patient populations, but also bring in new revenue to support the enterprise as well. And so, the pillars of our group are, sort of top down. So how do we think about the digital health strategy for the enterprise? So what do we need to do to be sort of, leading edge in terms of our adoption of these new tools? Also from the bottom up, we have incredible amounts of research capacity and innovators within the organization. How do we start sort of driving and accelerating those concepts forward? And then how do we start to build, stay on the leading edge of transformative R&D? And so through that, we're lucky enough within innovation to have about 70 people, mix of technologists, digital health experts that can help surround an idea and make it basically a decision of what to sort of move forward with and how, make build or buy decisions. On top of that, we have an incredible advisory board, and I don't know how many people from health systems are on this webinar, but we really look to the outside world to help us make better decisions on what to build, what to buy, who to partner with. And, so that's both through internal stakeholders, but also, VCs from the, top VCs and digital health companies, biotech, pharma. And so those people together are helping us inform the decisions. And so as we talk about in this session about how to decide, what to bring in to the organization, how to make decisions, what to do, what we've decided is to create a pretty massive funnel. So cultivating ideas from within, from companies on the outside, identify market opportunities, and spend a lot of time on the evaluation on the product market fit, the opportunity, the business model, where we as an organization have an advantage to help a company or an idea go forward. And then once we've decided on what we're going to accelerate on, really put the real resources to work by creating a commercial strategy, developing software, whatever that sort of idea needs to get to the next level, so it doesn't sort of die on the vine. Because what we've experienced for a number of years was, there was a lot of exciting ideas, but they had really no sustainability, mostly because they're probably more features than products that connect to the electronic medical record, but there's a wide variety of reasoning behind that. So we're picking way fewer things to put our resources behind and spending a lot of time scaling within the hospital, but building partnerships. And that ultimately, results in some sort of license of that tech or a new company or spin-off. As I said, one of the unique capacities that our group has been involved in is the sort of sprint process where we bring a wide variety of stakeholders, clinical, technical, business, content expertise to help us surround an innovator and take a process forward to decide whether the idea is worth even bringing to our advisory board. And that has been incredibly valuable because it means that people within the organization or outside companies aren't getting sort of formulaic responses saying, your idea isn't going to fit within the program. They get a huge amount of feedback regardless of whether they get selected. Just to give you a sense of the portfolio and what it takes, we spend a huge amount of time, as I mentioned, on the sort of the top of the funnel, the amount of ideas that are being sent to us, generated, evaluated, and then through that process, smaller number of ideas have diligence. We sprint on, about 10% of the ideas that come to us. then we have sort of a number of finalists that are going through our portfolio to our advisory board. And right now we have about 26 companies in our portfolio. About 2/3 are from the internal side, so innovators, clinicians, researchers that have had ideas, and about 9 external companies, startups, and that's because as over time we've built this infrastructure that initially was just built for internal startups, and over time more and more outside startups have been able to benefit from the structure that we've developed from building out of pilots, of technology, branding, a wide variety of features that startups benefit from. And we've had about 4 exits now out of that portfolio. If we start to look at the kinds of things that we tackle as an organization, you can look at through a few different dimensions. One of those areas is sort of at what stage we sort of select tools. So oftentimes they're still at the development and research side where they're in clinical trial. We then do select some projects that are much more in the pilot validation phase. They have some really good research behind it, but they need validation in more clinical settings. And then as we move forward, some are just more in the scaling commercial use, and then on the exit. You can sort of look at this in other ways. So technology that improves access to care, digital therapeutics, of course, are a big part of what we're thinking about. Screening tools and early detection, improving patient experience, clinical decision support, care compliance. So a lot of the probably areas that many people on the call are thinking about and prioritizing. Those are the various buckets that of projects that we're thinking about. Just a sense, we've been able to, through our partnership with either internal startups that we've spun off or a portfolio, we're just over 160 million in outside funding. So it does require dollars, not just within our organization, but the support that we've been able to provide has led towards outside funding to support these efforts. We also don't just rely on startups or startups are spinning, that there's also enterprise level partnerships. I'll mention those shortly. And so those are projects that, again, health systems, digital health companies, analytics, tech partnerships, biotech pharma, remote care. So again, a wide variety of more established companies, so less in the startup bucket, that we've been partnering with to sort of support a wide variety of clinical needs. All right, so what I'll talk about right now is just sort of one particular area that has been a big focus of ours, which is clinician burnout and opportunities to augment practice with technology. And while maybe this person looks super delighted with the use of their mobile phone and laptop, we know that this is sort of more the traditional view of a clinician's desk. Whereas despite the access to technology, we're still dealing with huge amounts of forms and paperwork. That really hasn't really changed, right? So the idea that there's a 2-to-1 ratio of clinical documentation to patient interaction, and we sort of have, and we're probably not unlike any other clinical institution where providers are filling out over 20,000 forms a year, that the number of admins for healthcare provider are just skyrocketing. And then we also know the numbers of mistakes are sort of being generated through administrative error, and a lot because of technology. So we have this sort of concern that more technology is not generating less complexity, it's generating more complexity, and that complexity endangers lives. And so we've been spending a lot of time to think about new innovative platforms, interoperability, digital tools that would enhance physician and patient experience. And that's from a range of super low-tech digital tools to sort of much more forward-thinking tools. So in the very sort of basic ways, we're implementing, like many other healthcare organizations, virtual visits. So the idea to have synchronous visits with your provider. We've implemented this idea that you can have virtual visits, and that that improves satisfaction and reduces cost. All the things that you would expect out of the launching of these platforms. So that's incredibly basic. we've been taking these things one step further at a time, one by, say, launching platforms that are much more around the Uberification of telemedicine. So this is one example. Nutremini was the company that we launched, helped launch, I should say, that takes the excess capacity from registered dietitians and creates matching algorithms between patients that need diet, specific nutrition plans with specific chronic diseases and the right type of dietitian. So that's sort of a next level virtualization of medicine. But the reality is there's even more basic opportunities as we think about decision support tools in clinical care. We have incredible numbers of evidence-based guidelines that require digitization and workflow development to essentially provide in the hands of our clinicians. So generally right now they have to go to binders, scatter across the floor to understand sort of what the sort of clinical standard practice is, and they do it in a very sort of manual way. So we've turned these into online tools, mobile optimized. That means that it creates much more efficiency in their use and adoption. The reality is, as we start building evidence-based guideline tools, there represents a whole other set of opportunities. Like, why are we not pushing some of these guidelines directly to our patients before they ever touch our institution? So we launched a Kids MD platform, which is now in sort of clinical trials right now, which is all about how to take and optimize our know-how and clinical understanding and build essentially tools that help make better decisions for parents in the course of the care of kids with things like allergies or asthma or acute conditions. And so we started to push a lot of that content directly to our pediatric populations. And if you start to think about that even further along, there's no reason why we're talking about sort of prescriptive forms that are already predetermined as we think about the landscape and the opportunities with healthcare chatbots and conversational assistants that are emerging and popping up in a wide variety of different areas. We've been pushing the limits of what we think are the opportunities as well. We've partnered with a company called Buoy, which is essentially an artificial intelligence clinical navigator, takes all the know-how that exists in clinical decision support, symptoms associated to outcomes, and basically builds a Bayesian network that essentially guides a patient through a conversation to an ultimate diagnosis. And why we're pretty excited about that is that, ultimately we have huge amounts of crowding of our AED and not unnecessary utilization. But if you think about the front door of the hospital now being a chatbot tool that allows a patient to go through a conversational assistant and makes a decision of how they should be triaged, all of a sudden now we have much better, more efficient utilization of our environments. And of course, now you think about the opportunities to navigate patients to the right area of care, whether, the ED, urgent care, primary care, and you can start to shift people away from the higher cost environments that they're ending up there unnecessarily. There's a whole range of other types of projects that we've implemented. Again, this idea that through the research organization, we've built a lot of evidence to support things like early identification of failure to read or dyslexia. So building screener tools that allow us to identify patients at risk of having reading difficulties. So turning those paper-based research concepts into actual full-fledged gaming systems that we can deploy at large has been a big part of what we're doing. This is an example, Mightier, which has been shown through clinical trials as a digital therapeutic in the gaming space. And ultimately, for us, this is an alternative to the traditional therapeutic around ADHD, and it's a gaming platform that modulates based on the response it receives from the patient. So if it detects stress on the part of the patient, the game changes and waits for that patient to self-regulate. And so this is a company that we helped launch out of the hospital and now is now serving families across the country. And then the last project we mentioned that we have now deployed is around virtual reality. This idea that if we can create personalized, immersive experiences of people's chronic illnesses, and which is especially challenging to explain a disease like Crohn's or IBD to a child, creating a virtual customized experience connected to the electronic medical record that ultimately provides a deeper understanding of the disease. This early signs in clinical trials have shown that giving that kind of an experience to a child actually improves adherence to medication. Obviously, a lot of our work is not just about building internally and prototyping and developing clinical trials. We would be out to lunch if we weren't working with some of the leading companies that are thinking about this space and deploying real resources. And so for us, we think about the ways in which a clinical organization can provide support beyond just being a data flow. There's a whole range of, from problem identification to workflow impact to scalability to cleaning data to testing and building algorithms and of course validating them, that a healthcare organization can provide in direct collaborations with the Googles and Amazons of the world. This is why our partnerships in AI and machine learning are unique because, say for instance, with GE, we have a radiology pathology partnership where we're collecting, tagging, building an algorithm that is distinguishing normal from not normal images. And that's a much more in-depth partnership than a true sort of like, here, GE, here's all our historical data. We're doing this in a range of different areas from imagery to time series-based tools. So in the ICU, we have a whole range of detailed, high-resolution time series data about vital signs. And so we can use machine learning tools to build algorithms to detect ventilator-associated conditions, length of stay, readiness to be extubated, and all of these now are being deployed and tested within our environment. We're also co-developing a number of tools. We have a tool that we're developing with Google Verily around data visualization and visualization of electronic medical record data and medication timelines. So again, this idea that we can, and this is an evaluation as well, so improving output from algorithms, but also improving visualization of data within our EHR. I'll just mention one last example, which is our partnership with Amazon. As we saw the rise of Alexa across the market, we recognized that voice is going to be this incredible modality, and we launched with Amazon this sort of Alexa for healthcare concept, mostly because we've seen what's happened in the consumer space where, Alexa is basically, reaching almost every household, and you see the sort of change in the ways in which people are interacting with technology and the ways in which the big tech titans are fighting over voice. In fact, we all know that like a voice tool is a fraction of the cost of any other connected device that you can get on the market. So that just means that these devices are proliferating pretty incredibly. And so we've been spending a lot of time thinking about the opportunities. So if you think about digital tools that serve our patients, we've been building websites maybe 20 years ago, mobile health applications the last 10 years, but voice and conversational assistance is sort of our view of the next 10 years of development. And so as an organization, we've been trying to figure out and deploy, test, and think about the tools that we're providing, whether it's in the home, accessing, your care plans, whether it's an inpatient unit, trying to take the conversations that a patient has about the needs that they have and processing that, or in the outpatient setting where we're essentially trying to capture the conversation that occurs between a patient and a physician and structure that information and input that into the electronic medical record. And so huge amount of opportunities when you think about, the ideal adoption of voice technologies, whether it's in efficiencies, clinical compliance, experience, education, diagnostics. And so that's been a big one for us. We've actually now deployed Alexa across many parts of the hospital, in the ICU as an example, where there is a huge amount of interest in the idea that, you can get basic information about bed utilization, on-call assignments, capacity, guidelines, decision support tools, all fed through an Alexa unit. And we have almost like this card that allows people to go through and ask sort of questions of Alexa. There's also opportunities in verification of organ transplants that we're launching, opportunities around checklists. So a whole range of opportunities, even things like controlling the inpatient room through a variety of tools. I'm just skipping through here because I know I'm running out of time. The real exciting opportunities are as you start to push some of this technology to the home. Can you make these devices, can you give them enough medical know-how to help with treatment decisions, protocol adherence, portal access, appointment management? We've been dipping our toe in the water. We have a number of applications on the Alexa framework that are all about giving information to parents and decision support tools around things as simple as should your child have the flu shot, or what should I do if my child has, a fever of 102.4 and a cough. And so arming these sort of consumer devices with enough know-how that you can make better decisions. With Amazon, we launched actually a check-in tool that connects directly to our underlying systems, and this is why HIPAA compliance was so important for Alexa, where now we actually can push check-ins with patients, and they can log things like appetite, pain scores, general wellness, and all that information can be collected, pulled together, and then assessed by clinical staff to make decisions on the course of care. So that's sort of where we see things evolving. And there's a lot more work to be done, because you can imagine the amount of challenges if you have an Alexa at home, how that's still challenging to work with. So imagine trying to put that into a clinical environment and getting what you want out of it. Now, the real opportunity in our view, and this is where the field is going, is in the biomarker space. And I think this is where some of the challenges and discussions in the society have really come into play. The idea that not only is it the words you're speaking, but the parts of your speech, and what can you deduce from the fact that, your components of your voice, your pitch, your volume, or your rate, your rhythm, all of these things have real implications for your state of health in a wide variety of domains: neurological disorders, sleep disorders, respiratory, cardio, ID. And so that's sort of where we're trying to now push the envelope, not just necessarily what you said into the device, but what are the features of what you've said. And now we're starting down this path of trying to spend a lot of time analyzing these kinds of data sets. Now, in the future, and I'll probably just close here, there's a whole opportunity as your voice identifies changes in your rhythm and rate. All of a sudden now there's an indication of a potential health problem that gives you some guidance and insight, and then leads you to a whole, to a prescription on demand. So there's a whole sort of part of healthcare that now can be taken out of our own existing clinical systems and just built off of, existing consumer tools. And I think from a children's perspective, we're trying to be part of that moving wave and change rather than sort of being left behind. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully, that wasn't too fast for everyone. I know there's a whole, Edmondo, you mentioned the whole sort of areas of social determinants. It's a whole other area we're working on. We've built platforms to support transportation logistics for patients, and so we can talk about that as well. But I'll leave it there, and thanks everyone for your time.
Awesome. So that was, John, that was great. And well, I'm sorry, I'm still taking notes, but there was just so much content in there. What I do want to do, there's a question that's popped up, but what I do want to do is kick it off a little bit with, I want to spend a little bit of time on the implementation part of this, kind of digital solutions in clinical settings, right? So, how do you, and your team go through, given how matrixed and sometimes hierarchical, sometimes less so, depending on the, the clinical setting, how do you go about, identifying appropriate and key stakeholders, engaging them in the implementation process and even the selection process, yep, making sure that you're staying aligned with key strategic priorities for the given department, service line, whatever. Like, how do you pull that part together? Yeah. When you're going through these really complex, kind of, yeah, environments.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie that it can be very challenging. But the way we've done it is that we're not sort of doing this in the bubble. No matter what we're selecting, we have clinical champions. We have alignment more broadly. it's always frustrating if you're an innovator to have a ton of committees, but we have a whole set of sort of key stakeholders across the organization that are plugged in to the digital strategy for the hospital, helping us make those decisions. We set a strategy for 1, 2, 3 years with a big bunch of different priority areas, and we start picking those off. And we have a process internally for making decisions, but then coming to that group to have final sign off. But it's always about trying to keep as many, and it's hard when you have so many stakeholders to keep so many people in the loop on those decisions. But the more that you do that up front, the way less painful it is. And I know that seems like a pretty basic thing, but in practice, it's really challenging. When you live in a world where any one stakeholder can kill a project, it's spending a lot of time trying to make sure that everyone's aligned from the outset is super critical. Also, our strategy now is not just us vacuum building things. We're heavily connected to other parts of the organization like IT and doing a lot of code development to limit the challenge that we have, for instance, in a handoff from prototyping and development to sort of more to long-term sustainability of a project.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I didn't want to lose that thread, because I think it's really important. As it's really cool to see all the great stuff you're being able to drive through, and really being a leader nationally in that. But there's a whole lot of hard work on the back end of that gets you to those, to be able to get to those solutions, and folks really should be kind of sober about what that looks like. So I want to grab a couple of questions that are popping up. So I want to kind of run through a couple of questions for you there, John. So one of them is, have you done any programs that combine digital health with kind of medication delivery, medication management, maybe even medication adherence?
So wait, combining medication delivery, you said?
Yeah, delivery, management. I'm throwing in adherence, but doing it in a digital way.
Yeah, I mean, that hasn't been a huge priority. I mean, listen, medication adherence is a big hot and button topic for sure. We've been building tools internally, especially for families with kids with complex illness, to manage their prescriptions. We launched an application with Apple called CareMap that was all about trying to do a better job of keeping everyone on the same page. It's definitely one that I feel like we have not quite tackled in the, it's not a solved problem for sure. And, we've constantly been prototyping different tools in the space, but, if there are people on the phone or you that have ideas, love to hear sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a couple of experiments around medication adherence, but it can be challenging. I'm not sure we're quite there yet in terms of truly driving kind of medication management, in a digital way. We did work with a company called Proteus, which kind of right. So you heard of these guys, real time kind of digital, right? So that kind of thing. It's the part of the challenge is that really the price point, and really thinking about your ROI on some of that is still challenging at this point. So, but there's potential in true kind of real time medication adherence, kind of leveraging your digital assets.
Yeah.
Another question's popped up here. So you've got these these digital solutions, especially around healthcare. Some of this stuff is relatively new for your general population. How do you guys approach education, trust, kind of engagement of your consumers of some of these products?
Right, it's a good question. So a lot of our work happens because we have a patient and family advisory council. So we spend a lot of time working with them at the outset to make sure we're aligned in the solutions we're selecting. So we're not just necessarily building things with the clinical enterprise thinking about them, but really with the patient in mind. So we spend a lot of time working with them, getting their buy-in, iterating with that group of people. We of course do certain things like ton of consumer surveys, and again to get insights from the outset, and then we have a certain amount of marketing ability to make sure that you know, that people are aware of what we're doing, but also why, you know, we leverage the platforms that we do. That's why we spend a lot of time working with companies like Apple and Google, because they have, you know, incredible platforms to work off of rather than trying to build things separately from those platforms. And so we immediately get a lot of uptake through those partnerships. And that allows us to improve adoption. But again, we spend a lot of time, you know, querying our users, collecting information, collecting feedback, and iterating as fast as we can.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You know, going back a little bit to the stakeholder question, in some ways, you know, so you're coming into a particular, whether it's a department, service line, however you, but either internal, like you guys are in a lot of ways, kind of baked into, or especially external for some of our you know, society members who might be coming in from the external perspective in terms of working with a health system.
Yeah.
How do you assess and understand if the organization and/or the organizational culture is truly ready for solutions that you know, really kind of are in that digital realm?
Yeah, it's hard, I have to say. You know, again, like we spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of time talking to the organization and listening to what, you know, people are looking for. You know, so we're not trying to shove projects down people's throats for sure. We're trying to find and prioritize things. Obviously, again, like because everything starts with clinical champions, there is already a need, so we're not forcing it. But of course, as you can imagine, there is a segment of people that are excited about the change and evolution, and others that are not quite ready for it. So it's an ongoing process, right? So we spend a lot of time trying to think about the projects that will get as much buy-in as possible and where people are very clear on the value prop. You know, the area of clinical burnout and voice-assisted electronic medical records and AI tools, there's pretty wide recognition that this needs to happen. I mean, I don't think there's any clinicians that are super excited about the documentation that they're making into the electronic medical record. So that's a great one where we have automatic buy-in. There are more complicated areas like care coordination tools and others that mean something to different people, which have been harder to get off the ground, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question came in. Are you working on any specific projects around vocal biomarkers?
Yeah. So my background is in infectious disease. So my interest, so a lot of my background in research is around early identification of outbreaks and epidemics, specifically a lot of work in influenza, but also Zika and other emerging infectious diseases. So very interested in being able to pick up respiratory conditions and seeing whether the underlying data can be used as a surveillance tool to get early insights into, say, a bad flu season or early peaking. So that's sort of the area that my research group is focused in. There's obviously a much broader set of opportunities, but that for us is like one that is low-hanging fruit and sort of could be something that could be validated pretty quickly at scale.
Right. Another question just came in, and it's kind of a double down a bit, a double click into the patient family advisory approach, which I love, by the way, this idea of a kind of a patient family advisory kind of involvement in this work. You know, so if you have a situation though where those folks are kind of rejecting a digital solution because they think that kind of a personal human kind of touch is more important. Like, so, you know, but maybe you disagree, right? How do you come to pull in their preferences around the need for maybe more of a human touch versus your perspective that maybe a digital solution with less human touch is more appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I wish we were hitting up against that, because then we would know that we were sort of pushing the envelope and we are sort of going too far. I think that has yet to happen because I think we are incredibly manual still to this day. And I think we're really focused on the things that consumers don't really want to do, right? So, so if you think about places where our patients are suffering, you know, like online scheduling of appointments, prescription refills, things that nobody is looking to have a call center do. So that, so the kinds of high priority areas are where digital can play a role, especially in the administrative rather than the clinical side. For the moment, all of the clinical decision making is happening in the background. So there's no sort of difference in the patient experience for the most part that patients feel in the things that we've developed, because they're only being used to aid the decision process rather than the interface that the patients have. Right. The places where there's maybe more digital are in the remote patient monitoring side, right? So clinical, continuous glucose monitoring as an example. But those are ones that we've had no pushback, because the patients are looking for digital solutions that are more, they ultimately lead to higher touch. Like, what's the reality is a lot of the digital tools that we're thinking about often lead to a higher level of engagement. Now, they might be digital engagements, but they're higher engagements nonetheless. So we haven't yet had a situation where there's been a rejection. Also because we spend a lot of time at the outset talking to our patients before we would implement something. So we're looking to their needs.
That makes a lot of sense. I think about, this idea of kind of a tech-enabled services approach to, so you think about the companies like Livongo, Amada, those folks where it's very much a digital, engagement, but there are actually real people that are skilled around, navigating and managing, whatever that chronic disease is. So they actually do have that on the back end, but the digital allows you to scale that expertise across a much broader population. And my finding has been that, folks really do gravitate towards that digital interaction, knowing that there is a human being on the back end somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
So good. So I think at this point, because I got a note from Jen that we wanted to, she wanted a minute or two to wrap things up. So I think we'll wrap here. Hand it back over to Jen and let her, kind of close it out.
Great. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
My cover has been blown. First of all, John, thank you so much for such a fantastic presentation. I like to think I know my onions about these things, but I'm sitting here with about 3 pages of notes. I learned so much. And also, congratulations. The work that you're doing is really extraordinary and forward-thinking. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who learned a great deal this afternoon. And Edmondo, really appreciate such an interesting discussion, and also how you sort of kept the thread of it remaining really solution-oriented. So thank you both, really appreciate it. For other folks on the line, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of additional opportunities coming down the pike. First of all, August 6th, Dr. Ray Dorsey from the University of Rochester will be leading our next Journal Club discussion. We'll specifically be discussing his review article on the use of teleneurology and mobile technologies. The focus is sort of on neurological conditions. However, it spans both high and low resource areas of the world. And I think if you haven't read this article yet, I highly recommend it. And certainly if you have time, join us for a conversation with Ray, the first author of this manuscript. And then we also have another webinar planned, the next in our series. Certainly after John and Edmondo this afternoon, they have a high bar to match. But Ben Birnbaum from Flatiron, Irene Chen from MIT, Luca Paschini from Evidation Health, and Andy Korobos from Electra Labs will be leading a discussion on machine learning. It's a Machine Learning 101, an introduction to the field of machine learning methods. I think we talk about it a lot. I think we could all better understand exactly what it is and how we can use it. So I hope that many of you can join us. John, Edmondo, once again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining this afternoon, and have a great rest of your day.
Excellent, thanks.
Thank you.